morning. Good morning. Welcome to the 2026 Great Decisions Series. It's my pleasure this morning to welcome Dr. Amilcar Challu, who is an associate professor and chairperson in the Department of History at Bowling Green State University. He is proud of leading a community of scholars engaged in training new professionals in solving real-world problems and lead a successful life in the modern professional landscape. He uses historical ways of analysis and interpretation in areas that go beyond traditional historical narrative, but some call applied history. This work is translated into work with local organizations of cultural heritage and conservation, leading curricular initiatives funded with federal grants, and being engaged with community events and media. He will have an interesting discussion with us this morning.
This one. Before? Not before? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Oh. Again. Yeah.
Good. Can everybody hear okay?
Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I love coming here. I've been doing this for a few years now. I don't know, maybe a decade actually. And a good friend of mine in the political science department that probably many of you know, Mark Simon, was always like raving about great decisions. And we talked about it because we would do talks as well. And we always enjoy this a lot because it's a very nice dialogue and very nice community we have here. So anyway, this is Mark. I thank you for the introduction. I'm in the Department of History. I'm not speaking for the university. I'm speaking for myself. I think I need to make that clear because it's coming on YouTube. And then let's see. And also, Facebook wars these days with some neighbors, so I don't want to to make the idea that I'm speaking from the position of the part. I'm speaking as a citizen of the United States. I've been here since 1999, citizen since 2009, I believe. And as someone who studies history, works on history, loves public history. That's better, I think, right? Okay. And public history in many ways is like kind of like Lincoln's democracy, or definition of democracy, right? It's by the people, for the people, with the people. You know? So I like the idea that history doesn't live in an ivy tower, that we are getting it all the time to the community, and the community gets back to the ivy tower as well, right? So actually, we don't have any ivy tower in the DSU, so the closest thing is what your own library. That is the description as well, but anyway. So the funny thing about today's topic is that, I don't know if you noticed, but the title changed, right? I think the initial one was Trump 2.0 and liberal internationalism. And right now it's more like the new international order in Trump's era, something like that. I always find it interesting how people work with titles, because the title is your entry point basically to the chapter. It's like all the texts I think we read in Great Decisions, and I've done that. The people behind these are top notch. John Eikenberry is a political scientist. He's in Princeton, I believe. Specializes in international relations. And I think Great Decisions, the book always makes a good job of bridging academia and the public, but at the same time, we may still have like some jargon and stuff like that. So if I also can help navigate that, and if I can navigate it, I'm happy to. One more thing I want to say that I'm trained in international history, international relations, but it's not my core field. Very rarely I teach international relations. I do sometimes. Last semester I did, but I primarily work on the Americas, and I work on economic history, comparative economic history. I work on environmental history, also comparative environmental history. These days I'm getting a lot into wetlands and a lot of swamps, and not the metaphorical ones, the real ones. And yeah, so anyway, so this article, I think that the thesis of this article to me is very simple. Can we move to it? Oh no, that's not it. No, go back. There. So the thesis of this article is very simple. We're in the middle of a huge transition in the international law, from what the author calls liberal internationalism to America first. I would like to stress particularly what liberal internationalism means, that we're going to get there, but just let me get it out of my chest there. When they say liberal, that liberal thing, it's not liberal as, say, Hillary Clinton or large parts of the Democratic Party. Liberal means basically respect for the rule of law in a universal way, free rights to express opinions, free rights to elect people, to elect representatives, typically free rights to establish business and to conduct businesses. It does not mean like a leftist or a right-wing ideology. In fact, one of the funniest things, once you step here into in the United States, is that in any other place in the world, actually liberal would mean something more similar to libertarian than liberal. Typically, it's a rare, but no one in a leftist party outside of the United States would call themselves liberal. They would hate that. I mean, what are you talking about, right? So when they are using the word liberal here, they mean that broader sense of respect for rights, basically universal rights. And liberalism as a thing came at the tail end of the life, at the beginning of the 19th century, French Revolution, American Revolution, and basically it means that universal rights, respect for rights. Then we talk about the franchise, how many people come, who has a say or not. But everything is defined in a universal way. Before liberalism, we have something that we may call the ancien regime, the old regime. Some people call it like a testamentary society or tiers society, where you have the peasants, the warriors, maybe the nobles, typically drawn from the warriors, and then you have also the religious figures. You may have the scholars here and there putting somewhere. Each one of these estimates, tiers, had very specific rights, and they did not communicate with each other. They did communicate, they lived in the same place, but they had very different rights defined by that way, and your rights as a peasant were very different than your rights as a normal person. One would pay taxes, the other one would not. One could be living in the army, the other not. What liberalism means is that now we have a national army, so we have conscription for everyone, right? We just draw a lottery and that's it. That's the first meaning of liberalism, not the draft, right? And the French Revolution instituted that. Another one is that once you define what a citizen is, each citizen is equal to their name. They are all at the same level, right? It doesn't matter if you are noble, not noble. It's the same. Now the issue is, of course, who is citizen? And we struggle almost, what, 4 scores and a little bit more to define, for instance, who among the men are citizens. 40 more years to broaden the franchise to women. And that's the trajectory here in the US and in other Western democracies as well. But when you define that universal class of citizens, the rights among all those citizens are within, right? And the system or the rules and institutions that allow people to interact with each other and respect each other's rights, that's what we typically call the liberal order and the rule of law. So these have been traditionally principles held very deeply, particularly in the US Constitution and in the American society. Again, not to say that things are perfect. And actually the founders were very clear about that, right? To build a more perfect union, not to build a great union, not to build a great union again. They always thought about the nation as something that is happening towards future that should be better for more people and for everyone. That's the promise, that's the vision of liberty. Right? And when a liberal order collapses, and it has had collapsed several times, 1930s, right? Basically, what happens is a big dissolution with that vision, right? It has not delivered. Maybe because of corruption, maybe because of fraud, maybe because of super high inequality, whatever it is. I mean, we can look back at the 30s. Liberal orders can collapse. They are not here forever. They need to be maintained. That's at the level of the nation. At the level of international order, it's kind of similar too, right? Nations have rights, and nations have states, have ways also to connect with each other. It took 2 world wars, basically, to build this order. It took a Great Depression to break the old order as well. Right? So from the crisis, a huge crisis that cost the lives of tens of millions of people, we build this order that the old liberal international. Okay, I already killed the mood. But I wanted to clarify what that liberal internationalism means. It doesn't mean that this is like an international order that favors parties like the Democratic Party or parties on the left. Liberal means this order of rules with some measure of universal right, never perfect, never. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to a story. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my own story, because it has a little bit to do with this talk, even though it doesn't look like. Can we move now? Okay, that's me. I wanted to find the photo when I was a teenager and I couldn't find it. But that's me actually, probably here in the US, 2002. That's the only thing I know. You cannot see the photo, but I have like a big tea bag of yerba mate, which is our national drink in Argentina. Now that they mention Argentina, this is the quote, right? This is my story, right? And I think it connects with today's talk. I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina. We typically compare Buenos Aires to big capitals in the world, like Paris, Madrid, New York as well. Actually, we have a very strong affinity with New York. We are grumpy. Porteños, people from Buenos Aires, we are really grumpy. We run into each other, which elbow our way through the subway and things like that. I was born in '69, so it was a very eventful time in Argentine history that I went through as a child and then as a teenager. One of those events, perhaps you are familiar with, is the 1982 Falkland Islands War that we call the Malvinas War. And that's the breaking point. The military dictatorship from '76 to '83, 30,000 people disappeared during that dictatorship. that was another breaking point. But that's not what I'm here. I'm sorry, after 82, we have what we call the return to democracy. And from 1983 on, with a lot of imperfections, but Argentina has been a democratic world. That's not necessarily what I'm here to connect with. Growing up, my parents have a very good friendship with Americans who are living 200 miles away, in the middle of the fields, middle of the farm. Many of them were originally from Northeast, from the northeastern states, New England, New York. And I grew up seeing these people at least a couple of times a year. They spoke perfect Spanish, but they had families from the US who came over, visited, and because we were like the airport city, they typically stopped by our house then to go to see their relatives. That's how I learned English. I took only 2 years, maybe 3 years of English instruction. I would just talk with them. I was fearless. I would say things. Right? So that's an interesting, right? Because that kind of these folks came to Argentina in the 1960s, early 70s. They were connecting to the Catholic Church. Actually, they were monks from the Cistercian order. So that's why they had families who came to visit them every once in a while. And it's not just monks that were coming to Argentina or Latin America. I mean, we had a lot of exchange. From the 60s on, we had a very active Fulbright program, where scholars would come to Argentina, and sometimes would go to the US. Even sometimes high school students would go back and forth, and perhaps more importantly, teachers would go back and there were some institutions established in Argentina. Argentina was never really, and still is not, like, very tightly connected to the US economy. So business was not that big, but we did have a lot of contact with Americans. Can you hear me okay? One thing that I found particularly interesting when the Democratic government was elected in 1983, it was like a turning point. It was a presidency that in many ways was antithetical, or not antithetical, was not in the kind of, was not aligned with the US government priorities at all. Was not like overtly critical. It was not like, say, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, if I dare to mention the country. It was not actively opposed, but it was clear that it was not that it had a very different ideological leaning, more like the European center left, what we call social democracy in many countries. The interesting thing is that this government went through 3 major military rebellions, particularly prompted by the human rights policy of the government. Not only that, the policy of the government was to try to hold accountable the people that have been responsible for the disappearance of the 30,000. And it wasn't very, it was more than a truth commission because they would go to jail, but it was not like a witch. It was not that everybody in the military would be legally or would be subject to the crime. 3 military rebellions, right? Had this happened in the 1960s, those 3 rebellions would have been a complete failure. In the 1970s as well. Why? Even the 50s. And why those coups d'etat happen? They happen because of domestic issues, but also they typically need at least a superpower looking the other way. The United States, even though it was at odds with the politics of the government, they did not give that nod to the military. Even though they had been trained in the School of the Americans, they had very strong class. Even though the government was also, the US government was also funding anti-Nicaraguan operations in the Iraq Contras, right? But then, in the case of South America, you are not getting it. It's just you guys figure it out yourselves, right? The president was able to conclude the mandate. Was a terrible economic crisis. Concluded the mandate in a military way, but in a military. Concluded the mandate. A new president was elected for the first time, I think, in what 70 years. A new president was elected, and the power was transferred from an elected president to a new elected. It was monumental from that point of view, 1989. The United States is not responsible for it, but the fact that the United States did not put pressure on the government to, or did not give nods to the military to say, hey, this is good, was important, was helping that democratic process in Argentina. A very different government was elected, absolutely. And we went from center left to center right, even farther right. When farther right meant free trade, not other things. And it was a big transition, right? Growing up in the 1980s, if you lived in the 1980s, you heard about the ozone layer, right? The depletion of the ozone layer. We were all like thinking we're going to die of skin cancer, right? If we are here, the ozone layer affects us. The depletion of the ozone layer, the thinning of the ozone layer affects us. In the southern hemisphere, the whole was huge because it was basically on top of the Antarctic. So you could see that in real life, like colors would fade in the paintings of houses, murals, and things like that. They would fade in a couple of years, very, very quickly, because there was a lot of ultraviolet light. And this thing happened, the Montreal Protocol. I don't know if you've heard that. It was a treaty that was signed in Montreal, where governments throughout the world committed to lower the emission of CCFs, the gas that is in our air, to contribute to to stop feeding the atmosphere with this gas that was basically killing the ozone layer. Today, the situation is way, way, way better than it was in the late 80s. It was extremely successful. What's going on, right? You have that Montreal Protocol, people are getting together and getting things done. The same board that was defunding national parks was very active in getting things done. That spoke a lot about the role of the United States in the 80s. Regardless of whether you sit in the ideological spectrum, it was clear that the United States had a very clear ideological direction, but at the same time, at least in certain parameters, if you are not like just hitting it right where the US perceived it as a national security, the United States was committed to a multilateral, rules-based regime of international relations. And it made America more powerful. Now, I said me, and I'm talking a little bit more about Argentina, but I thought about these trends from the United States and how that generated connections. When I was in high school, I don't know why, but I started liking to go to downtown and going to a library. That is called the Lincoln Library. It's the one at the bottom. It was a relatively modern building, a little bit of space like this, with lots of open stacks, tables where you could bring out the books and you could read them, you could check them out. It's a type of library network all over the world, but very strong in Latin America. and they are funded by the US Information Service, and if you know a little bit of that, it's a complicated organization, many ways. But it was a big part of what we call cultural diplomacy, a way to get an image of the United States, the relationship with the United States, that is not based just on diplomacy, on traditional diplomacy. It's trying to get people close, get cultures close. There were artists coming from the United States, particularly musicians that were very much involved in events in favor of democracy. So it was very, very powerful, actually, to be in Argentina in the late 1980s. We didn't know much about the United States, but you would have like this guy, Bruce Springsteen, next to Tracy Chapman, singing songs with local artists and things like that. Then the day after, in the very venue, you would have similar artists coming in from Cuba. So Cuba was playing the cultural diplomacy game as well. Anyway, as I was an undergrad, Argentine history training is very centered in Europe. Traditionally, was very centered in Europe. That's true history. Those are the true standards. We all need to know French history and German history, Spanish history. And then we have Latin America, like all thrown in one, right? We do like 6 courses on Europe, 1 on Latin America, 3 on but the funny thing is that I was getting more and more and more interested in history and academics, and I started to connect with the different universities that the one I was going. Everybody there was coming back in the 1990s from universities in the United States, now teaching in Argentina. And it was a very, very different culture, where the culture in my university, for instance, was to refer to everybody as doctor or whatever, Dr. Challu, right? They would all go by a first name basis. Just, talk to Miguel, talk to Andre, talk to this. Okay. But not only that, when you were talking to them, they would not make a strong point, but they kind of have a smirk if you address them as Dr. Guy. They would want to be called Andres, right? And to go by the first name. And they were engaging you in their own research. They wanted you to also choose a lot of your path rather than just follow the track that your advisor tells you to. It was a very different academic culture. The one thing that they had in common was that they had been trained in the United States. They would invite people from the United States to bring in like the research that they were doing, maybe or Latin America, they were hosting these Fulbright scholars and things like that. So actively trying to generate these linkages. And a lot of that was done by universities without any government getting in the middle, but a lot of that also happened through programs like Fulbright and things like that. 1997, 1998, I met a friend from the Fulbright program. She was from LA. Fantastic. I mean, we a cohort. That I still in that. And it was very fun. We would exchange things, I mean, ideas, but also gifts and music recommendations and things like that. For me, it was a natural thing that as I was like getting more an interest in professional history, that the United States was a good place to come and study, right? So I submitted an application. It was way easier than applying for any program in Argentina. Way easier. I submitted the stuff, boom, and I got admitted. Wow, that's fantastic. Then I got to the United States in a university where I would say like from a third to half, maybe 2/3, depending a lot on the department, were also people coming from all over the place, next to people coming from the United States. I got to meet all shades of America, all types of all regions and things, not maybe physically, but from the region, right? That brought a lot of connections. the United States also has I don't think it's anymore, right? It has a program called Title VI for language training outside of the United States. That was also a way in which a lot of people in the university would go to Latin American countries or other countries, then would come back and would bring back people from there. Sometimes they brought back cats as well. That was very good. They brought two cats from Cairo. They were kids. Anyway, it was very, very, very very interesting for, I think, for everybody. Eventually, I got funding to do my research in Mexico. I never specialized in good things, trying something new. Still, and there I met a Fulbright scholar that eventually brought me here to Bolivar State University. The first would be my wife. It was a Fulbright. And for the first time, I thought about as we were getting serious in living here. I mean, I was living in the United States, but I was thinking I'm going back to Argentina, like for the school professor that I was interacting with, right? And the majority of my cohort came back to Argentina. Those who were from Argentina. So these are connections that are created by that kind of diplomacy, that it's not the diplomacy of force. That it's not the diplomacy of plucking out a president and sending people. It's the diplomacy that takes a long while to generate. It's diplomacy based on building trust, connection between people, and take it from there. I'm not going to say, and I'm not saying that this was the only way of the United States to do diplomacy. No, I mean, we all know about that conflict, military conflict, has also been a central part of that liberal international. And I'm going to get there in a step. But the whole point of this story, right, in which, and by the way, one more thing, my story. Eventually, as you know, the Argentine economy exploded around, I mean, in several times, but 2001 was perhaps the biggest one. Eventually, my brother and his family, they moved out from Argentina to Mexico, when 2007, maybe, and my nephew, the oldest son, eventually came to the United States to do a PhD in one of the top fields, hottest fields today, machine learning, artificial intelligence. He came here to the States, to Pittsburgh, particularly here, what is the university? Carnegie. Yes, Carnegie. Because he was close to us. They didn't want to come here and be like, in a place that they didn't know. The idea that we were close and that we can keep that connection was central, right? They could have gone to a university in Europe or in other places. They decided, my nephew, with some other partners, now that they have a startup that is based on AI, living the dream of the startup kind of thing. So they never know if they continue in 6 months or not. But that's the kind of dynamic business that moves the US economy in these days, right? So look at all these serendipity links eventually, and it could be based anywhere in the world, right? Or the company can be based anywhere in the world. They chose to stay here. That's the kind of serendipity that has built also our economy over decades, right? The knowledge-based economy, the economy that is pushing things. Do we need more manufacturing? Absolutely. And we need to be able to do the iPhones here for sure. But we also, the foundation for that kind of manufacturing is all this knowledge economy, right? And look at how these connections eventually result in people establishing these businesses and moving the economy forward. I'm not saying this to say, hey, I'm great. No, nothing like that. I mean, this is a lot of serendipity, but it's serendipity that the United States government, regardless of the party, that the United States Congress as well, the executive and the legislative branch have been building for at least 8 decades, right? Or yeah, I would say since the 1930s. Anyway, so what I experienced and what I'm highlighting is what we call soft power, and now we can move to the next. And the big point about soft power is that we call it soft because it's opposed to power, right? One of the key things, one of the key assumptions underlying this chapter that we are reading is that there's no international order without some sort of hegemony. We have hegemony, we have power, and those powers need to play the game that helps them survive and thrive in an international order, right? Let me move to the next one because I like this slide. We don't live in a smart village like the one on the left, right? We don't live either in Ragnarok like the one on the right, right? We don't live in a smart village. There are power relations, right? And power is free. But let's go back to the previous one now. The big point is that durable hegemonies will not rest on hard power. Durable hegemonies have durable hierarchical orders of power, rest on a combination of threats to use the might of power, and most of the time using persuasion and using building this kind of soft connection. It worked for the Spanish Empire 300 years, right? After the broad moment of the Congress, actually what the Spanish Empire did was what we call an empire of stakeholders, like kind of cross alliances that lasted for at least 300 years. Part of the durable impact of that Spanish Empire today, that we still recognize ourselves as Latin America, has a lot to do with that durable hegemony. Was it power? Absolutely. But it's not just the blunt use of power, right? You need to have some measure of buy-in of those middle and small powers in order to have the stability that we cannot, or a superpower cannot just rest on blunt, right? And we have gone through this lesson very, very recently. That was the big takeaway was that what I would call the framers of liberal internationalists had from the Great Depression and World War II. What got us through the Great Depression was a lot of independence out of World War I, was a lot of betting into nationalism as well. Like, let's create a nation of very strong, great nations. It didn't work. Let's have a pact between different great powers. Didn't work that well either. Great Depression, then followed by the ascent of totalitarian regimes. World War II, it was a very difficult lesson. Right? And the big lesson that they distilled is for us to have a more peaceful order. Yes, we don't need to relinquish power, but we need to have a measure to share power inside, to bring in more people to the table and align them with the intent of the great, with the intent of the United States. It helped to create this order that there was a very clear competition between two different spheres of power, right? The Soviet Union and what we now call the communist bloc, right? And the United States and what we may call the capitalist or Western alliance. It helped that it was very easily delimited, that today we live in a world of more shades, more changes. The other thing that I wanted to go through in this picture there is that, in a way, liberal internationalism is like kind of a learning process betting for liberal internationalism was the result of a learning process in U.S. foreign policy. U.S. foreign policy traditionally has been balancing all the time idealism and realism. Think about the people in the early 20th century, Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, right? The idealists and the realists, right? We have always been born about this. What should be the compass of our foreign relations? Should it be moral ideas, moral leadership, the beacon, right? What was the beacon, right? In the foundation of Boston, right? I forgot the expression. That's the idealist. We are the first durable democracy in the history of the Western world. Let's bet on that, on everybody being a democracy, right? And the realism is more like, hey, let's get practical, right? If we don't do this, right, Great Britain will take over the entire Midwest. 1804, right? Or let's be realistic in the sense of also the United States has a strong economic interest in evolving in the 18th century, while the United Kingdom, Germany, France were also trying to buy and try to control some of these commodities and economies. The United States imports like a very strong, realist, pragmatic approach to say, okay, we have a right to trade with these people, and we don't want the Germans to just monopolize this trade and things like that. That was more the realist, who like very guided by national economic and security. Legal internationalism is not that one of these practices wrong. It's that there's a consensus, right? In which we need to keep like kind of an idealist framework, right? An idealist, particularly rhetoric, that gives legitimacy to the international order. At the same time that at key points, the United States needs to use blunt power to show who is the enemy, right? So it's that kind of combination that has to be. Anyway, what do you think about, I put this question, right? What do you think about this counterpointing between moral leadership and between moral and practical, I would say, considerations as a compass of foreign policy? What's your take? Yeah.
They were not necessarily mutually exclusive. That there are more people, more countries that realize our mutual dependence on each other, which is practical and more the better off.
But it's not necessarily either or. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
After the time what, I mean, we talk this, so I deal with democracy and all of it. This time, we're not all doing that.
Yeah.
Now, we're not even talking. I feel that.
Yeah. And that's a little bit too a kind of response in other places in the world that remain very critical of the US. Is that, well, yeah, it's a change in rhetoric primarily, right? But that rhetoric still helps. Yeah.
Or maybe any leadership around the world. But if there's we remember we have places.
Yeah.
You did. Instead of studying what they done to do that and learn from it, same time we get to learn.
Yeah.
And we believe in the fear of trade, that the country is more than 4 countries.
Yeah.
We're going to have to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a very good point that there are two good points here as well, right? One is the relative power has changed, right? And then China is the big, China is now the power in the world. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
And that was the other point. That,
we just have a few people online, so we'll
Yeah.
have to make sure we can
oh, yeah,
hear
yeah,
them.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so if you can repeat, but
Yes, actually, sorry. We have the 3 points, right? One is it's not necessarily either or, right? It's the two things can coexist. The last point was that there's a change in power, the rise of China. At the same time, and that's generating as well that particularly among the, I mean, in some of the traditional powers, or the powers that were holding, right? That their position is politically. Am I correct? Yeah, and I don't. Yes, yes, and fear is a big driver of decision making. It's a big driver for people supporting certain policy, for sure, but also for decision makers and stuff. Fear changes a little bit our cognitive parameters, makes us select information in different ways. Yes.
Primarily control,
Uh-huh.
China's been at war for 1 month, past 40 of years.
Yeah.
1 month.
Yeah.
1979.
Yeah.
And yet we demonize.
Yeah.
And their public money goes into public side.
Yeah.
Our public money goes to large margin, Raytheon, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah.
You gotta keep the war going, even if we're up every day.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. That's a good point. I mean, China, the investment in public infrastructure is huge. They do face a lot less. I mean, they don't face as many restrictions as we do. I mean, that's a very common public policy issue in urbanism, particularly, and transportation. It's much easier to build a highway, even more, much easier to build energy infrastructure, trains in China than it is in many of our Western democracies, because we rely on a very different process, right? That it's more, okay, let's see what you think about coming in. The train next door and things like that. For good reasons, right? But at the same time, it's coming. But the other issue that you pointed out is that China is not really engaged in military, except very sporadically, and that's very important because for a nation that is building up its economy, peace is a good fuel of that economic. Yeah, sorry.
We, for example, don't want to bring in Chinese cars,
Yeah,
whereas they had a Ford.
yeah,
I forget who he is,
yeah,
is driving a Chinese car that he wanted to see.
yeah.
And he was on CBS Sunday morning saying this is an excellent car. And
Yeah.
which I thought was wonderful. Yeah, but we're just afraid of them technology.
Yeah, it's an interesting, yeah, that the Chinese technology is getting to a very high degree of sophistication and very integrated manufacturing process, right? And it's an interesting thing because if we look at the 1980s, right, and Chinese manufacturing starting to come in, basically what they were producing were the toys in McDonald's, right, like in the capitals, right? That was coming from China, right? And right now, they control the whole manufacturing staff in a very efficient way. Yeah. And it takes decades to build that, to rebuild that. Yes.
so I have someone online that has stated, during the discussion on American foreign economic policy at this time last year, I made the point that it has been based on a Marshall Plan mentality continuously since World War II, even though the conditions that led to the Marshall Plan haven't existed since 1950 at the latest. Since last year, it appears that those responsible for American foreign economic policy have suddenly recognized this and have made adjustments accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big point that is coming in the next couple of slides. That world economic order, or that international order, that we call liberal internationalism, has changed significantly. The conditions have been very, very different, particularly after the end of the Cold War. And it's a very fair point to say, do we go back to that Cold War order or not? Right? It's a very, very good point. Can we go back to that international order? And again, well, we go through that in a second. But yeah, it's a solid point, and we need to grasp it. I think I would say, however, that U.S. Foreign policy has been grappling with this for the last couple of days. It's not just recently that people say, "Oh no, the order has changed." No. It started quite strongly after 9/11 to have like a complete re-envision of what we are doing. 9/11 increased that pressure of fear and anxiety significantly. Right? But yeah, so the last few administrations have been grappling with this changing. Yeah. Let me go to the next slide, even though. Liberal internationalism. I think the online comment addressed the first question, but I was wondering if you have different opinions. Do you think that picture of international relations, of the liberal internationalism, do you think it's like a romanticized or like a rosy picture of what the order was, or it has some base? That description of the liberal internationalism has rooted in security alliances, rules and institutions, trade, and democracy.
Yeah. It changed as the emphasis on one or the other change is what's going on in the world. What we see is our people competing against either economically or militarily or both.
Yeah.
Sometimes they go to the one way, sometimes they lead one the other.
Yeah.
I know the military put thing they call the nation.
Yeah.
And anytime the military, the army, or the marine side fighting people, need a huge investment in manpower, money, everything, and trying to build that nation up.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, it didn't work. We had to militarily handle it, and then every time one of these operations was over with, there would be a policy, military, especially the army, would never be going again.
Yeah.
Next war come along, right from the first thing, like that, Iraq real bad, Afghanistan, the nation building by itself, but fighting by itself, well, we didn't fight, fighting by itself. So I guess my point, you look at this, you gotta have both probably, especially if there's fighting going on.
Yeah.
But even if there's fighting going on, it's gotta be a balance.
Yeah. Between the two.
The United States any other country. I'm not sure who did it first, but we have a treaty that was with the United Nations. You're talking about alliance. It was a treaty, but it should have stopped war. That was
The United Nations.
regularly. And I don't remember every treaty.
Mhm.
There hasn't been any other point.
Mhm. Yeah.
We were scared.
And that was a big breaking for us. The biggest move. Yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the only thing we got into the career was the thing, I love the fact. What is
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I think, the power of the people and the started for. Good.
Yeah.
9/11.
Yeah.
It just started, he expanded very much so. Robert Bruce was looking
Yeah.
the more power, civil rights,
Yeah.
and now,
Yeah.
the authoritarian, the executive branch is beyond rule, and the legislative branch that is power. And it hardly exists.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a great point about the, I think, the weakness of these institutions is primarily that the main weakness is that it doesn't allow very quick response, right? And sometimes you need quick response, right? Sometimes you need to be able to break the step. These multilateral organizations do not work on a majority base, majority basis, and they don't work necessarily also if one of the big powers says no. Right? Otherwise, they don't have any interest in being in multilateral. So that's the Achilles heel of international organizations. They require building that process, and at some point it's not possible to build. Right? And the other point that I think both of you have been talking about, and I grapple with this in this chapter and this talk. There's also a pattern, right, of breaking the rules, right, of acting unilaterally as well at certain points, right, and that has a lot to do with that also rhetorical framing we were talking, right, that to a large extent that liberal internationalism, I'm always mixing the words. It's a lot about the framing. It's a lot about the rhetoric. It's not about the discourse. And at some key points, we go to the right side of the image, right? And that's the big contradiction, right, of the liberal internationalists. Let me go through the next. Can we go to the next slide? And then I'm not going to spend much time here, except asking that question, because I think that question is key. The emphasis in the chapter, and I don't disagree with the whole premise. I mean, when you're writing something like this, you need to pick a point of view. But the whole premise is that it's or the about the destructive dimensions of America First as a point, right? It's how much it's breaking that liberal internationalism that preceded, right? And so as change that it's disrupt the previous. But it doesn't really dwell much or try to think much about what's the positive vision of that. What's the promise of this new focus on international, new focus on international relations. And let me put it clearly from the very beginning, right? It's very rarely, I would say even never, you cannot build something without the promise that it's going to fix some things, that it's going to make some things better. So there is a promise behind America First in terms of international relations. There is a vision that is behind this, that it's not just let's correct it. It's let's build something new, something deep. What is that promise that is behind America First as an international? And that requires getting a little bit outside of ourselves and seeing that more in between the lines and how other people, how other countries react. What would be that positive dimension, that positive vision of America?
I think it's still developing.
Uh-huh.
I don't think we really know.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I know, finally I had to wrap my arms around now and philosophy. I used to go in and look at things. You try to, how can we make more efficient? How we Silicon Valley would take the glass bottle, we throw it on the floor and drink. And that's kind of what American First. You just throw it and you break it and then you fix it. That's how Silicon Valley. I think you sort of get that through your brain.
Yeah.
This isn't hard on me because I don't like it. But maybe one or two good things might come out of it. I don't know, but I don't like it.
Let me go. Yep.
We talked at length at the beginning about the relationships of country, not necessarily governments, but universities and how you came from another country and studying here. And now this is getting more and more difficult for foreigners to come here to study, and vice versa. There are countries now that are not permitting their students. And I'm wondering, this scares me because I grew up in another country, and I remember my father always admired the US for the melting pot and the relationship. That this country was around the world before, and USAID and all those organizations that promote goodwill for the USA in other countries. And with when we retire those organizations, I'm afraid that it creates a vacuum that China and Russia are going to jump in and fill. And that will be detrimental to this country internationally.
To a large extent, that has been happening too. I mean, since the early 2000s, China has taken a very, I would call it a sort of unilateral approach to international development. They have been putting a lot of money to build infrastructure in other countries, good terms of loans and things like that, good terms, particularly in terms of interest rate. So they look like the friendlier version of the International Monetary Fund in a way. They have lots of strings attached, and there are other ways to think about China, always foreign aid at strings attached, right? But yeah, that is a good point, because other countries are feeling that war. And I would say more than Russia is primarily China that is feeling that war. I would contend that I mean, we're talking a lot about Russia. It's a major world power. From an economic point of view, it's really China the one that we need to look at, because Russia's economy has been grew after the big decline after the end of the Berlin Wall, but still its economy is not really growing that fast. It's more like Japan, and China is the one that.
I know that we like to think in dollar amounts, but I think that the goodwill that all those organizations promoting around the world will worth a lot more money than we think compared to the money that was cut from those organizations.
Yeah, and that's a big bet of liberal internationalism, is that these things are costly, and even they are costly in terms of efficiency, as well as you were pointing out. They may be a rate to do many things, but those costs are still lower than the other, right? That's a big bet of internationalism.
The universities make money from.
Oh yeah.
There were many.
Not only universities, I mean,
Because they were starting in the University of Northern Iowa.
yeah, not only universities make money. I mean, businesses depend a lot on foreign work as well. The local economies that some of these universities have also created are super important. So today, I mean, I talk about Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is perfect, really bad, because in between Carnegie Mellon University and Pittsburgh, they brought in a lot of international students, many of whom also decided to stay. And that are part of the economy, right? And that has been like, yes, absolutely. The New England economy depends, I think it's the linkages between universities and the economy. It's like 25% of the economy depends on higher, right? And higher ed, particularly in those government fields, it's super globalized. It doesn't matter if you're American or not. But what matters is that the universities are based in, right? And that's, yes.
What part is AI going to
Uh-huh. AI, what part is it going to have? What is the Terminator network?
Starlink?
Starlink? No.
Yeah,
Yeah. Starlink.
Starlink.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, number one, I'm working a lot on AI. Actually, a lot of those images were generated by AI. I could not tell AI to put a circle in Russia and China. So I'm not that confused about the technology because I could not even get it to make the right. The problem is, right, is that this is the same technology that that is running drones and is deciding also, it's making like very quick defense goals, right? So one thing of AI is that it accelerates even more, and it makes split-second decisions or minutes decisions that before you could take a whole committee of people evaluating this, right? That's a little bit the risk of that it can accelerate and create more instability. That's one of the risks. Okay. The other issue with AI, I would say, is that if AI, and I mean this is always a debate, you never know what's going to happen, right? AI could be it's probably at this point like the new internet, and the internet changed things a lot, right? The balloon may also pop, right? And it may not change things like that. But if it changes, it's very likely going to change the economic shape, the relative economic power of different currencies. And that's the big deal, right? That's why there's so much investment in AI throughout the world. It's very energy dependent as well. So the AI is creating lots of other incentives, and those incentives to create infrastructure of energy are interesting. We talked about the facility that China has to create infrastructure, right? And that's something that can give China a certain edge in developing that AI. I would say though that a lot of what's going on in innovation in the AI space, the United States is right there. It's the investments are quite significant. But yeah, my hunch is that this is going to be like all these changes in information technology in the last 100 years that have accelerated the path. It doesn't take any more like in Napoleonic period, 3 months to get a message from point A to point B, right? By 1900, it took minutes, and right now it's taking seconds. And the more that we are giving AI agents to do things, right, the faster those decisions are going to come, the more also unpredictable they are going to come, because then we're going to get into algorithmic, right? We have gone through this a few months or years ago when there was a glitch in the AI running stock market, stock market trade, and the AI read the algorithms read some signals, and they started like selling the crazy. The stocks like crashed. Within minutes, the stock markets had closed because they realized this is a glitch. But by that time, still, stock went down 5%, right? We are talking about nuclear powers, and this is basically and work different. That's yeah. I think it's affecting military capabilities a lot, and this is what the Ukraine war is showing. It's a war that now it's like a playground of new military. Right? It's how to run a war of drones, and those drones use a lot that AI. We don't realize how much all these everyday things are relying on it. But just a drone trying to navigate, identify a target, things like that, that's all AI that is running behind it. So it is changing military capabilities. Give me a second, that there was another comment. Or, yeah, let's, and then we go.
Really not. We are helping with the final saving.
Yeah.
This decade long.
Yeah.
Outside of land.
Yeah.
And we are talking. Getting over God, right? And we are there. Yeah, we are divided. The future helping with will be get them out. And we're often with this realm to build a.
Yeah.
And if there's not, no, there's no, United Nations, no. Humanitarian organization.
Yeah, and
So how we even
yeah.
China,
Yeah.
we let ourselves do.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of what we think here about Russia or China in other parts of the world, they are thinking about us, right? And yeah. And again, I'm keeping all this at the level of perception, right? I think there are very different dynamics there. It's very difficult for a power like the United States, for any power to acknowledge and apologize for mistakes. they typically don't do, and because it has other consequences. I'm not saying this is good. I'm saying very rarely there's an accord that is not forced by extreme circumstances. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Do I like what's going on? But if I look back at something that happened after 9/11, and I lived in a very time. And then people think that the US is doing it on their own, we're doing kind of for, they did have to. So, countries
Support where?
from those countries.
Yeah. Oh.
Because they did.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
those countries gave a lot to what happened
Yeah.
in the West. And the kings and the emirs and the sultans, they were all in this country.
I think that's a
And
very.
we need to remember, it's just not one person. The powers that we do, what we see on TV is
Yeah.
entertainment, okay? I think we need to remember that it's just not to do that.
That's a great one. That's a great one. And then I said my own personal story, a lot about my generation growing up in not only in Argentina, in other places in Latin America, was growing up also with that realization. This is, I mean, this is a lot on also on us, right? How we fell into the dictatorship perhaps and things like that. Yes, and I think it is very, very good to think about that way, because by the end of the day, even though we have a lot of military might, and I mean, it's impressive. That military might does not do much with those other forces. And even if we are looking today at what's going on in Venezuela, right? It's extremely clear that Maduro was betrayed within the regime. It's obvious. It's very obvious.
But then here,
Yeah.
somebody can come in and say, stop,
Yeah.
our country, and there might be other countries saying that we gotta say.
Yeah.
But would that make it right? To just come in and say,
Yeah, no, it's
just because some people want that to happen.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that it's.
yeah. No. That's
Even if-
yeah. No, I was not implying that justifies. I mean, but I agree. I mean, the basic idea is two ideas, right? One is that this hegemonic power, even with all the military might, it's not just on the United States, right? It depends critically on allies that may not be liberal internationalism, may not be predicated on that kind of consensus, or but they depend on more than just military might of the United States or economic might of the United States, which is enormous, right? They need some other external out of the US one. The other point that I have not made through the call, but I think it's also important, is I simplify a lot when I say the United States. The United States is not really that monolithic. There's an executive, there's a legislative branch. Within the executive branch, even the goals, say, of the Department of the State Department and the Defense Department could be diametrically different. When we are talking about something like Venezuela, it's extremely clear. Part of the administration did not want to do it. This was Marco Rubio winning the bid to do it, right? They are repositioning within the administration. Vance and Marco Rubio, basically, they are. If we don't understand that difference as well, that we don't get why we get into these outcomes, right? It's that there are some people within the administration that are winning by following one path or the other, right? And those differences that we have within the administration are quite quite significant. Add on top of that, the legislature, add on top of that, the military, who can also act independently in many different ways. Right, and it's less monolithic than what it looks like. What it's impressed about this last year is how much in alignment the administration has been able to rally behind certain issues. And that's very, I mean, that's behind a little bit of the thrust of this administration. If we take a look at the comparison between this administration and the one, the first version of the administration, is that first version did not have the level of consensus in the administration. The amount of leads that were happening, the amount of hand repressing, right, armrest, was impressive. And right now it's, I won't say it's a house in order, but it's much more tight, how it's going. I think I'm going beyond the time, but let me finish with the last question for this day. We're not going to discuss it. What about that? Is there a middle ground, right? Or is there an alternative, right? Because I do think the point raised in the online question is right. That old order is not coming back. What's going to emerge is, or each version is something different. It may be, we don't know exactly what it's going to be, right? But I think it's critical for us as citizens to think about what's the alternative. How do we build, if we believe in that idea of living an international instant cooperation and things like that, can we build that with this world that is so different than what we have been? That's a question for us, right? If we don't believe in liberal internationals, what's also the alternative? Is this approach? Is there a middle ground? What is it? Right? And I think such a flag for history, that's what history, I think it's quite important, in that it gives us lots of things that happened in the past. People have been going through this, maybe without AI, maybe without all these immediate things happening, but we have hundreds of years of history to look back to, at least 200 years of history that are extremely relevant to understand what's happening today. Right, and I gave a talk a couple days ago about the Monroe Doctrine and the Monroe Doctrine, just very briefly, but some of those considerations that were in place in the law that we were thinking about in 1823 still today are very important. So anyway, that's a flag to not forget about. Anyway, thank you. Sorry that I talked too much. I can't.